All right, welcome to the Mentis podcast. Today we have Josh Stroup with the Iron Valley companies, and in particular today we're going to be talking about Iron Valley Modular and all of the different cutting edge things you guys are doing in the modular construction world. Josh, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we just got started here, you were telling me a little bit about the history of modular construction. Why don't we just start with, where do we start and where are we going, and kind of just, kind of give us a quick understanding of the modular industry. Why should we care?
That's a great question. Really, if you want to get into the history of modular construction, I would say the first examples of what we would consider modular construction went as far back as really the early 1900s. When companies like Sears and Roebuck would actually sell homeowners pre-cut lumber with plans. You go and you basically buy a house. It's already pre-cut. You take the parts home, put it together. And there you go. You have your cabin, you have your house. That was really sort of the first examples of what we would consider sort of modular construction, in the sense that portions of the house were already pre-planned and pre-cut. They just need to be assembled. As we know, the sort of the modern version of modular construction really took off in the 70s. And back then, it was actually administered and managed by HUD, not the building codes that manage all the same constructions of single family homes today. And for a few decades, modular actually sort of developed kind of a stigma. The industry ran into some problems because it was managed by HUD and not the same. It didn't adhere to the same building codes as all the other houses. There was a drop off in quality. There were some issues there.
So when you're saying the stigma, we're talking what some people would consider just like a trailer is kind of what I think some people
your grandparents' modular home was right. Much more akin to a trailer or double wide than it was a traditional single family home like it is today.
And for some reason, even though those are still, they're probably a little bit cheaper, they're still, a good option for a lot of families out there.
They're absolutely good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
think you're right. The stigma is kind of going away.
It is. That is not to take away from, anyone who invests in manufactured housing or double wides or anything. They have their place within anyone's investment strategy. No issues whatsoever. Simply pointing out that back then, modular homes followed the same rules and guidelines as any company building a true manufactured house, a double wide or trailer. So when you compare that in terms of just the quality of the build, how well they hold up, there was a drop off when you compare them to the site built traditional single family homes. Fast forward 20 years, that's just not an issue anymore. And because of that, the newer generation of home buyer has no opinion, positive or negative, about modular construction, because the homes today are now indistinguishable from a home built on site. In fact, if you were to look at any one of our listings from previous projects, nowhere in our listing do we ever say the house is modular, because we don't have to. In terms of how a house is appraised and how it's valued, there is no delineation between a modular home. Not a modular home, a home built using the modular construction method, I think, is a better description, versus a house built on site using the traditional method. Our home, yeah, go ahead.
Let's unpack that just a second, because I think what most people don't understand here is when they're thinking modular, they're thinking you are literally just maybe dropping off that trailer. But maybe give us the clear definition of what a modular home looks like today. Are you delivering a completely finished like living room and a separate kitchen, and you're kind of like piecing them together? Or are you doing more like a panelized approach? What is modular, and what does that mean today?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So in our world, there is no such thing as a modular home. We are building homes using the modular construction method. And what that means is we are leveraging some of the same tenets and some of the same efficiencies associated with manufacturing, and we're applying them to construction. assembly line process, interchangeable parts, increased efficiency, shorter construction times. We found a way to take all the same factors that make manufacturing companies so successful, and now we apply it to a construction project. We apply it to how we build homes. So when a home is constructed by our company, it's a finished permanent structure. There's no difference between a home that we built in our facility and a home built on site. There are, to your point, you mentioned panelized modular construction. So there are certain different types of modular building, and there are companies that specialize in what's considered panelized modular, where they kind of build different sort of pieces of the house, sections of the house, then they put it together on site. What we do is a little bit different. We are building entire chunks, entire sections of a house, and then stacking them together like Legos. So when we're delivering our modular home, the kitchen is done inside. The home comes plumbed, it comes wired, there are toilets installed, there's flooring installed throughout different areas of the house. The home comes 95% complete right out of our facility. When we walk away from the project, the only work that really has to be done is just sort of very, very small finishing work done inside the house. Maybe some drywall sheets have to be delivered loose because the city inspector wants to see inside the walls to see how you did your wiring, how you did your plumbing. So certain things like that have to be done post-delivery, but it is our goal to deliver you as complete of a house as we possibly can, so that you have next to no work to do after our part is played out, after our part is done.
So give me the vision of what's happening. You guys coming off the end of the factory line, you guys are picking it up, and then it's literally just getting placed on the foundation. They're screwing it down, and then maybe just kind of completing the waterproofing or whatever might need to be done. Is that kind of what I'm envisioning correctly?
Yes, exactly. So within the state of Pennsylvania, you can haul up to 15 feet 9 inches wide on the back of a tractor trailer. So when we're shipping to different states, we're basically limited. The width of our modules are limited to whichever state has the most conservative or the most stringent transportation laws. So in Pennsylvania,
so you're really getting into like, I have so many. I personally really love this industry. You're getting to a whole bunch of questions that I have, and right off the gate, shipping. Isn't that the bottleneck of this industry? I mean,
yeah, it is.
Isn't that what's caused all of this to slow down and just not maybe move as fast? Like, technology moved. We had an iPhone, 10 years ago, and now you couldn't even identify what it's just technology moves so much faster. But with construction, it just seems like we're going a little bit slower here. I seem to think that the bottleneck is shipping. Am I wrong on that?
You're not wrong. That's an excellent point. Shipping is really the final bottleneck. That is really, I would say, I wouldn't even say it holds us back as an industry, because we are so much less expensive in all the other areas that in the aggregate, it still makes sense to do.
So what you're doing is getting creative with what, I guess the part of the shipping is you're now getting creative. And that's where some people would say the panelized is better, because we can stack those panels really high on the back of a truck and we can put it together on site. Or some people say we should only do bathrooms, because bathrooms can sit on the back of a truck easier, and there's a lot of plumbing in there. Maybe even kitchens, but forget the living rooms, forget the dining rooms, do that all on site. What would you say to all that?
Those are all very good points. And I would say that one approach can make sense depending on the certain circumstances of the project. If you have to ship a project halfway across the country, where your transportation costs would otherwise just become so inflated because of that cost of the project, you could imagine a scenario where panelized modular construction might make sense just for that reason, because you can stack those panels. But if you're shipping, if your project is somewhat closer to your facility, then perhaps that doesn't make sense. Panelized construction wouldn't make sense, because there's a trade-off. When you ship panelized, there's actually an increased cost associated with your setup work, with your erection, with your installation work on site, because there's that much work that has to be done putting all the panels together. So there's a trade-off. And it's our job as modular professionals to gauge and to sort of judge, all right, based on what we're trying to accomplish, what's the most sensible approach to how we're going to build this house. So we do very little panelized construction in our world. Panelized construction doesn't make a lot of sense for us. So therefore we do ship just true modules to our job sites, and we stack them in place.
So how many modules are making up your typical home?
Typically it's about 3 to 4 modules. If we're thinking about a standard 2,000 square foot home, usually they're going to be about 3 to 4 modules. It will take us about 24 days to build the house in factory, and it'll take us about a day, like maybe 12 hours to put it together on site. So we'll bring a crane out to the site. Trucks will bring the modules out to the job site. We'll just pick the modules off the back of the trucks, stack them in place, sit them on top, and you have your house. It's there.
So basically the site, you basically have your site work contractor and your foundations, they're done. Like they're pretty much like,
yep.
You know, everything's graded. You're pretty much just sitting there with a foundation. You show up one day with 4 trucks, pick, nail it together, you know, simplifying things here, but pretty much your house is there in one day. Is that
pretty much your house? That's exactly it. So
are you doing a roof on top of all of those pieces then? And then that way there's a seamless, it's seamless, or are you guys coming with roofing already on?
Roofing actually is already on. And I would say over 90% of our projects have the roofing already installed, because what we do, and I'm very, very proud of, is very clever. Our typical, our standard roof system is a gable roof system. So we actually build our roof on hinges, so that when it's being shipped, we can actually level the house, level the roofing of the house. And when it comes to delivered, we can then open the roof up and stabilize everything on site. So we do actually have the roofing already installed in factory.
And then when you, I guess, go up, then you just put a ridge cap on top and then you're done.
Exactly.
That's one of the, okay. So it's just one of those small little items that need to be done. And then I guess siding, is it mostly on, or how are you, kind of
siding is mostly on. We do ship some of the siding loose inside the modules, because we don't want the cables from the crane to damage the siding when we're lifting it up. So some of that siding does have to be attached post delivery, but again, that's all part of our sort of post delivery finishing work that has to be done. And usually it's a day or 2 tops worth of work. Very small crew, just a few guys will stay behind and finish everything for us. You mentioned foundation work and site prep. Yeah, there are some aspects of a construction project that will always have to be done on site. Obviously, the foundation work and the site prep has to be done on site. So we utilize very trusted subcontractors to do that stuff for us. Folks who understand how we need the foundations to be poured, how we need our footers to be done, all of that. But yes, everything is waiting for us when we bring the modules, so we can just seamlessly stack everything in place.
Makes a lot of sense. And, really, I've got a ton of questions on the best ways that this is going to kind of evolve. And it gets down into
if I could just sort of, you brought up the bottleneck issue of transportation, which I thought was very interesting. I want to make sure I have a chance to touch on that. So currently, really the transportation and the crane work represent 2 classes of expense that you're going to have on a modular job, where of course you may not have on a standard construction project, unless your GC is charging you for delivery of materials and everything. But let's assume that's not the case. So you're going to have the transportation cost and your crane cost on a modular job. Now, as it stands today, because the cost of specialized labor is just going up through the roof, it's just skyrocketing. So the cost of construction is skyrocketing. We are, in pretty much every sense of the word by this point, a more sensible, more financially viable way to build by this point. Even with the transportation costs, even with the crane cost, we're cheaper in the aggregate. We're more efficient in the aggregate, that it makes sense. However, to your point, as technology continues to evolve and how things continue to improve and become more efficient, we're always looking for ways to make ourselves better and better. So we're talking about, I mean, how can we minimize our transportation costs? One thing the industry is working towards is collapsible and foldable modules. You know, what if we no longer had to have an oversized shipment? What if instead of putting a 15-foot 9-inch wide module in the back of a semi truck trailer, what if we could get the width of that module down to about 8.5 feet? Once you get down to 8.5 feet, it's no longer an oversized shipment. Your transportation costs plummet. You no longer need to use very expensive diesel tractor trucks. You can haul it with an F-250 in a U-Haul trailer. That is really where our industry is going to make us even more financially competitive, even more efficient. How can we utilize rail? Perhaps if we can utilize rail, we can expand our geographic footprint. So we can now do projects even further away from home. Because if we can collapse our modules down to 8 feet, we can put them in the back of a rail car as well. So we are working on ways to get better and better in an area where we already are better and more competitive than most of our on-site counterparts, most of our competition, really, in the traditional site-built space. We are market disruptors. That's what modular construction is. We're a market disruptor in a field that desperately needs to be shaken up.
Well, no doubt there. I mean, the construction industry is facing all sorts of labor shortages, and this is no secret that prices have gone up, and it's tough to get people in the trades, and we definitely need to come up with a better way to build, because eventually it's just unaffordable to people to buy a new home.
Right.
So that makes me think about like how you're going to focus on scaling the company. At first, the way that you're talking, I figure there's economies of scale to be gained by having a massive factory, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 across the country, and you kind of just you get your efficiencies down as much as you can. You add robotics to the line as much as possible, and you name it. You just throw it all at that one factory. Then that puts you at a very far distance to the majority of the houses that you're building. Or is the play to have smaller, kind of easier to pop up factories all over, but maybe with a little bit less efficiencies, but trade off those for the cheaper transportation cost?
What you're describing is these are the conversations that are taking place within our boardrooms every day. This is exactly where we want to go. So yes, to all the above. There's an economies of scale certainly associated with having larger multiple factories, and that's where we're going. Right now we build our homes within a factory in central Pennsylvania, and employs about 85 of the best people you could ever hope to have work for you. It's where I'm from originally, in central Pennsylvania. So being able to take that, and then imagine we find a way to, now we're creating a network of facilities. We put a second facility in Georgia or North Carolina, similar size. You employ about 100 people. That allows you to output, I would say, at full capacity, about 1,000 modules per year. Now, let's say instead of building a single family home or building a small apartment complex, we now have the ability to build a much larger apartment building. We can now build a 20, 30 story apartment building. But now we have, a portion of the project built by facility A, a portion of the project built by facility B. Everybody has a part to play. Everybody knows where these modules are going when they're being built in the facility. And now we're having a network of sister facilities sharing the work so that we can tackle larger projects than we ever thought possible. And that's really where we want to be going here in the next 5 to 10 years.
It kind of surprised me there with that answer, actually. I thought you were going to say that the cost would be cheaper on homes, but then you brought it into the apartment world, which is that you're bringing it into our world. And obviously construction is very different in the apartment space, and especially if you go high rise. And even if you just go mid rise, you're not talking concrete, and fireproofing is probably required at least on a couple floors. And then I would assume that your modular is now switching into a metal,
Exactly.
probably metal built, and that's a totally different, a totally different part of the construction industry. And maybe I just had a different assumption here that might be incorrect, but isn't there going to be modular companies for the commercial space and modular companies for the residential, and that it's kind of going to be one or the other?
When you do set up a modular facility, you do have to kind of have your primary medium of construction, your primary material kind of already pre-planned. You can't really build wood frame houses and structural steel apartment buildings on the same line. That just really doesn't work. So you are right about that. But that doesn't mean that the same company can't do both.
Oh
And
no, yeah, I
that's
suppose, but
really
I guess that's what I meant by the factories, though, is if you set up these multiple factories, you're likely going to be a factory for single family housing, or
correct.
potentially some garden style or 3-story apartments. Even then, I wonder if it would be more difficult. I guess the question I have for you on that is how easy can these designs change? How dynamic can you be with what you're producing, or does a customer kind of just get what you already have?
That's a great question. So one thing that I'm very proud of, one thing that does set our company apart from most others, is that we are a custom design build GC. Even though we are in the modular world, we are not beholden to a catalog or a menu of pre-designed homes or apartment complexes. We work with architects all the time. We have a great in-house design team that I mean, if you're a homeowner, you're a home buyer, and you have a dream home in mind, and perhaps whether it's affordability issues or just not being able to find the right home that currently listed that really resonates with you. We have home buyers come to us all the time with sort of, sketches and drawings of their dream house, and we find a way to build that house using the modular method. That is one thing that really sets us apart from most modular builders, is that you don't just have to choose what we post online. We have the ability to make custom housing as well. And the same would go
At
for
an increased price compared to your ABC options.
typically, yes. Typically,
Okay.
yes. Our pricing is just like any other contractor. We look at, all right, what do you want to put into this house? Obviously finishes and fixtures and everything can really drive up pricing in a house. So it depends, all right, what level of fixtures or finishes do you want to have? All of those things impact the pricing. But just like any other contractor, we look at, all right, what's it going to be? What's our cost to us going to be to build this project? And what do we think we need to charge so that we can do it profitably? And obviously, too, knowing that our competition or all the other home builders building things on site, naturally we need to be positioning ourselves in terms of our pricing. We need to be positioning ourselves at a place where we can win that business, just like any other GC.
So you're actually acting as the full GC. So you're doing I guess that makes the most sense, because if you aren't the GC, then it's going to be a disconnect between the site work, the foundation, and
Right.
the speed of everything. So you guys are already, okay, so you're acting as the GC and you're selling, I guess, communities, or because I guess what I was thinking you were doing was selling to GCs and they're building with your modular construction. I guess maybe give me an idea of what's the approach right now.
We are GCs. So again, if you're a developer or a home buyer and you know what, you just like, hey, I don't want to deal with it. Someone just please come and take care of this for me, build us our house. We have the ability to do that. We have the ability to take on that level of work, that level of responsibility that honestly most modular builders can't do, or at least they're unwilling to do. I'm not saying that we're the only modular builder that acts as a GC. I don't know that. I don't think so. But we have the ability where most modular builders don't. So we can take that level of responsibility on. Conversely, some of our customers are also general contractors. So they, as you can imagine, they don't want to just remove themselves completely from the equation. They will come to us acknowledging that we have the ability to increase their overall efficiency. allowing them to scale up and take on additional projects, whereas perhaps otherwise they'd have to say no to some customers because they're just spread too thin. So they can focus on the foundation work, the site prep, the utility work, and then just have us build the modules. But they're taking care of everything else. So we have that level of flexibility to kind of provide solutions to all manner of different customers.
Okay. So with the GC in place, typically you're going to have your local connections. Typically GCs can work in a certain geographical region, and they'll know the building inspectors, and they'll know probably how to get something through zoning, although that's typically the architect's job. How are you guys achieving, kind of broad brush acceptance of something that's not necessarily approved by every jurisdiction? Not every building inspector is going to be happy with this maybe coming into their market. And if you're just acting as the GC without some of that local connection, do you have like a whole department who's kind of like educating and trying to get this out? And that's been a big issue with the modular world, especially in the apartment space, when you're talking about different levels of construction. But I'm just really curious about how do you get that acceptance, especially on the building permit side?
Yeah, to that end, we absolutely have people who help us with this. You mentioned architects. Our architectural partners are very important strategic partners of ours because they're the ones that deal with the zoning and deal with licensing and the permitting agencies on a daily basis. So we are very, very careful. We're very very careful, methodical about what kinds of relationships and partnerships we forge with different professionals in different jurisdictions. So our architectural partners really do help us out a lot. Now, education is also a very big part of our sales process. Just like we're doing now, Zoom was just a godsend for folks like us, where we're based in one area, but we're trying to build a project in Baltimore, for instance. Well, we can have an info session with, the Baltimore zoning board, and they can ask us all the same questions that you're asking me now. We can provide visuals. We can give a presentation on how this works and explain to them why not only is this allowing somebody to build perhaps on a lot where otherwise they wouldn't be able to because it would be cost prohibitive, but modular construction is actually, it's great from a community standpoint, because you imagine living in a neighborhood next to a job site. You're living next to a job site for every day for 9 months with equipment and tools and people driving in and out. Most people don't like that. Most people are not appreciative when their neighbor is building a brand new house. They got to deal with all that stuff. We are in and out in a day. After we build the foundation, we pour our footers, we can tell the zoning folks, we can tell the city folks, we're in and out in a day. Your community, the members of your community are going to love us. They'll show up with their cell phones, they'll videotape, they'll video record us, using our cranes and everything. Everyone thinks it's super cool, but we're in and out. So people's lives are not upended. They're not being inconvenienced by living next to a job site. So for that reason, it actually goes over quite well.
I bet you're going to get a lot of buy-in from like tenant associations and everything. That makes a lot of sense, especially since
Absolutely.
the product that is built. I mean, there's literally no way to tell that it's a quote unquote modular built, product. So, I guess you're getting you might get the tenant associations or the community boards on, like to accept it. And maybe the building inspectors are kind of buying into it now, especially since, it seems to be, I guess it's getting more and more accepted, it seems like. But what about like some of these unions and stuff? And I know that this is where, like, especially when you're talking like in like big cities, that I know that they're saying modular construction really makes a lot of sense if there's the alternative to having union work. At what point do you think the unions are now going to say, whoa, we have to be involved in building those modulars if they're coming into our city because you're taking away union jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. Unions don't really like us very, very much.
Suppose not.
I'll be honest. We're not their favorite people. The unions, we're not the most popular people with the unions for that reason, because the construction industry is incredibly political.
Indeed.
Yeah, for most, maybe people don't really pay attention to that, or maybe they're unaware, but it is incredibly political. And it's unfortunate because that comes at the expense of private residences. It comes at the expense of private individuals who perhaps have to pay inflated wages to build a house just because the union wants their cut. So
Absolutely.
there is a little bit of a hurdle that we have to kind of manage when we're trying to get into certain jurisdictions like New York. New York is, I would say, probably the worst when it comes to this type of thing, but it is doable. It's difficult, but not impossible. And one nice thing about modular is that we're not sort of exposed or held to prevailing wages, because we're building the house in Pennsylvania, which is not a prevailing wage state, hauling things into New York. So once we're able to kind of get around that red tape, there's another area in which you save money.
So these are really making a lot of sense in those jurisdictions today, a union area or an area that requires the prevailing wage. But for this to get this mass adoption, you guys are going to have to be the same price or cheaper than on-site construction in essentially the cheapest jurisdictions in the country. Is essentially that's like the Mason-Dixon line. You got to get there. Once you cross it, I don't think you can go back. I mean, that's it. I mean, you're now cheaper in every capacity, and then the industry kind of just shifts 100% towards this, except for maybe in the most specialized of cases. Is that an accurate assessment?
That's an incredibly accurate assessment. You know, when you think, if you follow sort of the titans of our industry, which are like, you know, the Whiting Turner, Clark Construction, Hensel Phelps, Sukit, you know, those types of Skanska in Chicago, I think, they are really like the big boys who kind of drive commercial construction. They are also tiptoeing around modular construction. They're, you know, which tells you that they are running into all the same issues, all the same headaches that even the, you know, the newest flipper, the newest renovator runs into, trying to find quality labor, trying to find quality subs to do the work. When they begin to pivot, you know, the folks who have really no reason to make changes to their business model because they control the industry, when you see them begin to pivot in certain areas like this, that tells you that we're getting serious. Like modular is really going to become sort of the future of this industry, because we are cheaper. Really, we're at a point now, there's very little reason, I'll be honest, very little reason to not attempt a modular job. Now, we are not an end all be all. We're not a cure all. So there are certain situations, as you alluded to, there are certain situations where we just can't do it. You know, we can't do a modular project. For instance, crane ingress egress is an issue. You know, if we can't get our cranes there, then that makes it pretty difficult. Yeah, it's a problem. Yeah, we can't get our cranes in there. There's a problem. If there are overhead power lines that we, you know, cause us to not allow us to get our crane there, and then the city doesn't let us take the power lines down, that's a problem. You know, so there are instances where, you know, we just have to tell a prospective client, like, hey, we're sorry, we can't do it. But that is, at this point, that's not very common. That's a relatively rare occurrence. We started out, I didn't think I touched on this when we started our conversation, but when we started out, we were real estate investors, house flippers, just like anybody else. Like we got into real estate just the way most people do, and we were just beat down. We were beat down and demoralized trying to flip houses, dealing with contractors who wouldn't call you back, wouldn't show up when they said they would. Maybe the quality of the work was lacking because, you know, there are a lot of contractors out there, and most contractors, if we're being honest, contractors are very good at building things, but not a lot of contractors I would consider good business people. And all of those things sort of just lead to problems. And we were just beat down, and we had to find a way to, we had to think radically. We had to find a way to kind of change our own business model so that we could continue to be profitable and continue to down the course of being successful real estate investors, which was our dream, is what we wanted to do. And modular, because of our ability to centralize that work, control QA, QC, solved a lot of our problems. And we are at a point now where I don't think we'll go back. If we can build a project with modular, we will 100% of the time.
Makes sense, especially, if you're controlling it in-house and it all, kind of alleviates those headaches. I have to agree that on the smaller side, especially for the guys who are just getting in, or the contractors who are focused on kind of that one-off job, are typically not bringing a industry-leading level of professionalism or business acumen, or maybe even just the paperwork and insurance sophistications that some of these larger contractors bring. And without that, it really actually ends up costing a lot more money and time, because you're just kind of spending so much oversight, I guess, so much money on oversight to just make sure that the project's not getting off the rails, that you either go big or potentially you look at going modular. And I think there's some benefits to both. So going forward, technology continues to change, and I think technology really hasn't maybe completely changed the way that we build. I mean, certainly we use different trucks and different construction equipment and everything, but modular seems to me like it has a unique ability to add robotics to the industry like never before, because it's such a repeat type of exercise, where if you tried, everybody was like, oh, the robots are going to go lay the bricks on site. And I'm like, I don't think so, because it's different on every site. And maybe they will one day, but that seems like a harder obstacle to cover, or a farther road to go, than in factory you're cutting this piece of wood over and over and over and over and over again, the same, without somebody being there. Is that kind of what the industry is seeing? What should we expect on these assembly lines as far as homes are concerned? When you look at an assembly line for a car, I mean, the people are there working on the robots, not working on the car. Is that going to be kind of where we're headed, or are we still 10, 15 years away, 20 years away, or further?
Yes and no. We're a ways off from having sort of machines and homes completely automated. To your point, just because of the level of customization that may occur from house to house. Now, if you take the customization out, that's a different story. If you treat houses the way you treat cars, where you're just one is the same as the next, that's a different story. And there are companies out there who are operating like that. Again, they're not custom builders. They just build. This is what we build. This is our model. And if you like it, great. If not, buy somewhere else. That's not who we want to be. Now, again, regardless, you might have an increased level of automation, but again, being fully automated, I think, is a ways off. We are automated now. We can be automated now. And especially with regards to just the framing. When you frame out a module, when you frame out a portion of a house, it starts out as a rectangular cube, effectively. It starts out just as a 3D rectangle. So that allows us to effectively, at the beginning of a line, have automation, have robots assemble the outer framing, assemble the structural portions of the module, and then the folks just come on to do the wiring, the plumbing, all that stuff. So that is something that we're trying to improve upon. That is something we want to do, especially in the commercial space, where we're just building, rectangular cubes of structural steel framing. And that allows us to do something quite interesting. So that would effectively, as we're anticipating, as we're calculating, allow us to dramatically reduce our production times overall in a project, because we can have robots work around the clock, welding and putting together structural frames overnight during long hours. And then when workers come in the morning, they're just focusing on doing, the flooring and the wiring and the plumbing and everything. So that is something that we're really excited about.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated to see how the technology is brought into the industry, especially for some of those jobs that are more dangerous, or just really heavy and hard on the body. And there seems to be a big area of opportunity there, and definitely I'll be curious to see if I can follow up with you in a few years to see how that's changed. I think one of the other things that people forget about, and maybe the like we talked about in the beginning, the stigma is that these things are not as good a quality. In my understanding, that's not the case at all, because on a job site, let's say you're trying to get a really tight air envelope and you're trying to have like an under a one air exchange an hour, and basically that's almost passive house level. And let's say you're trying to go to that standard, but you might be able to test the house, but then 2 weeks later, your HVAC guy runs a massive hole through the outside of the building envelope, and who knows how he patches that back up, and all of a sudden you have these small little things that can add up to maybe not good waterproofing, not good airproofing. Maybe there's just not a bunch of the leveling on the floor. Your materials are kept out of the elements. Can you talk about like some of those other examples that maybe I'm not thinking of here that maybe are really why this is a better way for us to build? What else does the industry offer that maybe isn't just kind of surface level stuff like I mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you are losing nothing when you build a
Well, that's a
modular.
strong that's a
Yeah,
strong endorsement.
you're not. You're not. You really aren't. You're losing absolutely nothing. The homes are built just as strong. I would argue in some cases, perhaps stronger than homes built on site. First of all, because we're building in a controlled environment, level means level, and square means square. There's no cheating. There's no like hiding unlevel flooring under the carpet,
Mhm.
or what have you. A lot of builders do that. We can't do that because we have to build everything exact. So square means square, level means level in our
You're not getting a
world.
lot of callbacks for like squeaky floors, let's say.
No, we don't get a lot of callbacks for that. Because if that were to happen, it would never make it off the line.
You're catching it. Your quality control is catching it ahead.
Yeah, it would never make it off the line. We have a very rigorous multi-point inspection. We go through, we have a team that walks through the modules, make sure everything was done the way it was ordered, make sure everything works properly. So it would never make it off the line if that were the case. Another thing too is we have the ability, I mean, we build wind resistant housing. We have the ability to build for coastal neighborhoods and coastal events. So we really are at a point now at this industry where I think it's sort of just general apprehension and general fear of change that I
Mhm.
think gets most people to perhaps not go the direction of modular. But again, that's what we try to do during our sales process, because so much of that is rooted in education.
Makes sense. Now, another piece that I've talked about this with a couple bankers, and I think some are starting to get on board with it. But uh, one of the major, I guess, issues with the financing side of modular is the fact that you guys need, and I think a lot of companies need, and I don't know if this is the case with you guys, or maybe you have a way to solve it. You need such a large deposit. It's not, hey, give us 10 grand or 10% of the money. It's like, hey, I need like 50 or 60% of the money because I'm going to build your entire home really quick. But then the bank is feeling the exposure there because they essentially don't have something that's insured. It's not like actually not there on site. So are you guys going to have to provide the financing until it gets on site, or what's the way that the banks are getting comfortable with this? And then on your side, are you comfortable like providing all of that level of financing, and then all of a sudden somebody might back out of a project, and like how do
It's a great
how do
question.
you just balance all of the financial, because we're not talking small money here when you're talking about doing this at its scale.
Yeah.
How do you balance the risk on either side so that everybody's happy?
Yeah, I mean that is one of the bigger issues in the industry, and any modular builder has to run into. I am happy to say, however, to answer your question, we're at a point now where more often than not, the lender is going to be okay with it. We're at a point now, we've spoke to enough lenders. We've educated them. Perhaps they've seen other modular jobs from other builders, so maybe they have a little bit of experience. we've discussed this now to the point where they're getting more and more comfortable. We don't, I mean, this is us. I can't speak for everybody, but typically for us, a deposit is around 15%. So
That's
it's
actually
not,
quite reasonable.
yeah, it's
Okay.
actually not that much higher than what you would give any other home builder to get started, to go out and buy your materials and everything. So we go off of 15%. Some of our lenders actually really like working with us because what we do is we effectively work using an escrow account that holds the lender's money, and then we operate off of draws. So
Draws in addition to the 15%.
in addition to the 15%. So
Yeah,
after
yeah.
we get the 15%, which basically just solidifies your place in the queue, in the production
Okay.
queues, and then allows us to go out and buy the fixtures and buy the materials and the finishes that you want. We then work with the lender. They put the loan amount in an escrow account effectively that we manage together with them. We operate off of draws. So we have to show your lender what we're doing. We have to show them where we are in the process. And we do this by documenting everything. We take video, we take photo. We have inspectors come out who represent the lenders. We have inspectors come out to the facility to see the project, to see what we're doing, to show up to the site. So we work very closely with lenders to make sure they're comfortable.
Well, I think a lot of people are familiar with the draw side. Like you put the
Yeah,
money into an escrow account. You every 30 days you email the bank, say, hey, here's our payment requisition. They do an inspection. I think a lot of people, have some sort of understanding of that in the commercial real estate world. But you guys are going so fast. I mean, you must have a bank inspector there every week. Like, how do you draw? Like, if you're building a house in in 27 days, then is it, are they just coming halfway through and then at the end, or not? Like what does that
yeah.
look like?
So there's usually there's an inspection done after we pour the footers and
Okay.
pour a foundation, because the footers have to be signed off and inspected by the city inspector anyway.
And I would assume that you probably want to know for a fact that that's done and signed off before you guys start the house, or do you guys sometimes?
Assuming we're not the ones managing it.
Okay.
If we're the GC, then obviously we're going to know if it's finished. But yes, if we're not responsible for that, we're going to want to see that that's been done, or at least will be done by the time the house is finished on the production line. But yeah, I mean, usually there's a draw done around the time the footers are poured, the foundation is poured. Then there's another draw done as the modules are getting built within the facility to keep things going. But normally, we have documented proof that modules are being completed, they're being marked off. So the lender knows that there are values there actually being built up.
And
And then
your
there's another,
insurance and your insurance is covering them as well, kind of along the way
yes,
there. Okay.
yep, we have, yep, we're very astute when it comes to insurance. That's one of my backgrounds actually, so we're
Mhm.
very good about that. But yeah, there's a draw done at that point, and then typically a draw done toward the end of the project. So we don't have inspectors come out very often. Now the drawback to us, and I think it's just the way the industry is right now, is that the builder actually holds a fair amount of risk, a fair amount of liability toward the back end of the project, because we're not getting paid after that first initial deposit and then the subsequent draw after the foundation work. We go quite some time before we receive a sizable payment from the lender. So we're actually on the hook. Like, we actually have a fair amount of skin in the game. And yeah, sometimes customers walk off. Sometimes they walk away. Maybe something happens in their lives, or maybe funding somehow fell through, what have you. And they walk off. That does happen. Really no way to manage that at this point that wouldn't be, I believe, too disruptive to how we do business with other people. But when it does happen, effectively they bought us a house, really is what it is. They whatever money was put into that project, we just pay to finish it. We basically sell it to ourselves, and then we just put it up as a rental somewhere.
Understood. Well, that works. And, I think, I guess some of these groups that I've seen across the country, it looks like they have, immense capital needs in the beginning as they grow their factory, and it's extremely capital intense. And then you have this financing issue stacked on top of it. It's just like, it's actually there, I mean, just like you said, there's a lot of skin in the game and a ton of risk. And I salute you for taking the plunge and trying to make it better. Um, I think a lot of people are excited about this coming forward. I think, especially on the green side of things, just being good stewards of what we do. I think the fact that you're able to cut down on how much waste is also a part of the build. By I don't know what margin, but probably a pretty significant margin. Anybody who's been in construction knows just how many dumpsters roll off those sites every day,
Yeah.
or every week, and I'm sure that's significantly less in your space. But what about, I guess, what about the different industries, and which one is going to be the winner? Is it going to be the hotel industry that's going to see this as a major win? Is this going to be the low-rise multifamily, or is this going to be like single family? Which of those three, or maybe there's another one that is, which of those should we pay attention to for the largest push here in the next few years on the cutting edge technology?
Well, I think modular construction lends itself very well to hotels, student housing like dormitories, so university buildings, and of course, affordable housing. So if you look at companies like Boxable, which I don't consider a modular builder, they don't really build the same type of product, but their whole business was built on the backs of government contracts to build, barracks and affordable housing, et cetera. So obviously, when you're building those types of buildings, customization is not really that important. It's okay if they all look the same. Affordable housing projects can all look the same. Military barracks, of course, can all look the same. Dormitories typically all look the same. So modular construction lends itself very well for those types of things. That's no different for us. Obviously we have a strong cost advantage in those areas too. I also believe that single family homes are still
Yeah, no
going
doubt
to,
the single family home
yeah.
it's getting disrupted. I mean, it's just too expensive for most people. I think this is going to be the way. I don't know
We are
any other.
still millions of units undersupplied.
Mhm.
And with the cost of labor continuously going up and up and up, of course, inflation, et cetera, is not helping that either. But really, it's just a lack of people wanting to go into the trades and supply and demand that's driving up that cost of labor. People need to live somewhere. So if they can't afford what's on the MLS, naturally they're going to begin to look at building homes for themselves. And I do think that's going to be a big part of at least the next 3 to 5 years where we're going to be with modular.
So you brought up one of the last 2 points, and that I was thinking about here, and one of them is inflation. Everybody's seen the increases that we've all experienced, especially in the construction industry over the last few years. What exposure does somebody working with you have versus maybe a site contractor? It seems like because you're able to build so fast, it would be less exposure. But what did you do? Are you guys giving no escalation contracts, or what kind of guarantees are you giving your customers?
That's a great question. So we do have some wording built into our contracts that state, if there's a unforeseen supply chain issue, like another cargo container ship gets stuck in a canal, like something ridiculous like that, and things that are just you just can't foresee. That kind of stuff happens. We have to have the ability to readjust our pricing within a certain degree, within certain parameters. However, that doesn't really come up quite so often with us because, to your point, we build so quickly. We're not having to plan a year in advance. I mean, really, when you hire a private home builder to build you a house, or even do a flip nowadays, it's really closer to a year commitment.
At a minimum, yeah.
Yeah, at a minimum, it takes a year to build a house on site, really, at this point. We don't have to plan that far in advance when it comes to purchasing our materials, because once we get started, the house is built in only a few weeks. So while we do have things in place to protect ourselves, I'm happy to say that we don't have to really lean upon that very often, just because for us, it just doesn't really come up.
That's nice. That's really nice considering
Yeah.
what's going on. Now, I guess that ties into the last thing here, and that's how you get started. Because, I think maybe in the apartment world, it's a little slower. You're probably doing, large entitlements. You might be doing major zoning requirements, and there might be even doing months of site work before you're even ready to bring something on site. But maybe in the single family world, can you talk about how people get started? Like, when do they approach you? When is the best time to like think modular? Is it kind of 2 weeks before you hit the ground, or is it like a year before you're even ready to buy?
I would say, reach out to us, or a modular builder. Hopefully us, reach out to us at the same time when you're talking to other home builders. We're an alternative to on-site home construction. So they are our on-site counterparts, are our primary competitors
So
in this
do you,
space.
okay, I want to buy, let's say I'm going to build a house. I want to come to you. Do I come with my architect? Do I pick one of the designs off your website? Like,
You can.
what does that look like?
So our pre-designed homes are, as you can imagine, a pretty good seller when it comes to real estate investors. People who just want to put up something fast. They don't really particularly care what finishes there are, because they don't have like an emotional tie to it. They just want to put tenants in there,
Yep.
ASAP. Yeah. So those types of folks tend to grasp towards the sort of the pre-designed homes more often than the private home builders. But you can come to us with an architect. You can come to us without one, and just with some ideas. Download some photos off of the internet of a house that you like, or we've had people come to us with not very well drawn sort of their schematics on a notepad, and they're not very autistic, or not very artistic. So I mean, they come they come to us with a notepad of a drawing, and we kind of have to decipher, okay, what is it you're trying what is it you're trying to do. And no, that kind of stuff happens all the time. But I would say, if you're interested, come to us at any point. Again, we only make up about 4.5% of the overall construction industry, us being, modular builders. So the vast majority of the folks that we interact with have never done a modular project before. They don't really know much about modular construction. So again, education and just sort of getting them used to the idea is naturally going to be part of it. So I would say no time is too early. If it's to have a conversation.
They don't need an architect, then, is what
They
it
don't
sounds
need,
like.
they do not need an architect. We have our own in-house design team. So
Okay.
we can help you design a house. Now, most likely, especially if you're building in more of like a suburban or urban market, the local municipality is still going to want a local architect to stamp your drawings before you get going. So at some
So
point,
you might be able to provide a lot to that architect. Maybe that fee is
yes,
still a little lower, but they're still taking, for that stamp, they're still going to take their fee, and it's going to be substantial.
it will
So
be cheaper. It will be cheaper
it should be
than,
cheaper. Yeah.
yeah, it will be cheaper than having the architect draw your entire house.
Okay, so I come to you, you give me your in-house design team, and you guys, I guess, spit out a quote on the other side saying this is going to be how much the house is going to be. I guess that's where the exposure is between that quote and whenever we say go. And I suppose that's on the person who's buying the house. It's up to them whether they say go now or 6 months from now, where it likely won't be the same cost.
Our design fees are typically about $2,000.
Okay.
And the nice thing is, I mean, they're yours to keep. Even if
No,
you don't,
I guess not the design fee. I mean the cost of the house. You guys at the other side of this are going to say the house is worth $100,000 today, but I'm assuming you're not going to hold that price forever. And 6 months from now, if it's 105, it's 105. That
if we have to. Now, I mean, we have some customers who we quoted 6 months ago, and it's still the same price.
wow. In this market, that's pretty substantial. I mean,
yeah.
that's something to be said.
So really, it's up to, no other way to put it. It's really up to our discretion. And if we believe we have to increase price, obviously I don't want to increase the price on anybody because I don't want to scare anybody off. Obviously, I want people to build with me. So it really
No, I
comes
don't think
down
it's like
to,
it's not a cash grab situation. I think it's simply the reality of things costing more. I mean, do you have like a really robust back of house, like purchasing team? I'm assuming you're trying to
that's a
source.
big part of it. Yeah, sorry, I didn't understand your question. So that's a big part of it, is that we operate at such a scale that we have these relationships, these partnerships with suppliers, that we can purchase at perhaps more agreeable pricing than the average home builder.
Yeah,
So, and that
would imagine.
allows us more stability in our pricing, I think you could say.
Makes sense. Well, Josh, is there anything else that we missed? We covered a whole lot today on the modular industry.
No, I mean, I could talk about this for days on end.
So
I
could
mean,
I like it a lot.
we love what we do. We love what we do. This really is, I think, the future of building, where the industry's going. And we love sharing our story and sort of educating people in this process, getting them more comfortable with the idea of building this way. So all I would ask, I mean, if anybody ever has questions, or if we can help in any way, please, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
All right. So those investors, those buyers, anybody interested in talking with you guys, where can they reach out and get in touch with you?
You can visit us at www.ivmodular.com. Please also email us at info at Iron Valley CI.com, info at Iron Valley CI, just with, general questions, or if you have an idea for a project, or maybe you have a piece of land under contract, you want us to look at it to see if modular would work. We'd be happy to do that. That kind of stuff is free. It takes us just a couple minutes. We can look at your site on Google Earth, see if there's anything that jumps out at us that would be problematic. If it works, if it doesn't work out, we'll let you know. Otherwise, let's find a way to do it. Let's rock and roll.
And you're currently working in which geographic regions?
All up and down the East Coast. We are based in Pennsylvania, so the bulk of our business is in the Mid-Atlantic region, but we send homes all the way up to Maine. We send homes all the way down to, Georgia, Florida. We've gone as far west as Tennessee, Illinois. So really we can go just about anywhere. What I tell most people is that you can expect to save about 20 to 25% on the overall project cost, about 50% on time, just because of how quickly we build it in the project site. If you are within 4 hours, a 4-hour drive of our facility in central Pennsylvania, which in terms of the population is like half the country. That's how densely populated the Northeast is. So if you're part of that half of the US population, and you're within a 4-hour drive of central Pennsylvania, I'll tell you, we're going to be really tough to beat on price and just overall our capabilities and everything. Once you get further out, transportation becomes more of an issue, but even so, cost of construction being what it is, who knows?
Mm-hmm. I think you're speaking a lot of people's language, and I wish you guys the best as you guys continue to grow. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much. It was really nice talking to you. Appreciate it.